Okay, welcome back. These gentlemen are the 19 hijackers from September the 11th. Men that you'd quite reasonably assume hail from countries like Afghanistan, or Iraq, perhaps Syria, even Libya, or any of the other countries we've managed to invade or destabilise over the last 17 years. But you'd be wrong. One's Egyptian, one's Lebanese, 2 are from the United Arab Emirates, and 15 are Saudis. Which kind of makes my ears prick up a little bit when this fluorescent prat says stuff like this.
I want to thank Saudi Arabia and my friend King Salman.
Because that's kind of the equivalent of a Jewish person standing up on a podium and saying, I want to thank the Nazis, and more specifically the SS, for giving us such a lovely stay here at Auschwitz. Okay, this group of well-dressed action figures coming complete with woman are the 9/11 Commission, who were formulated after the attacks in order to find out basically what the fuck had just happened. When they were asked where the funding for the attacks came from, they said it was of little practical significance. Basically because it doesn't really matter who paid for this.
Holy fuck!
Because obviously the terrorists just sent off enough cereal coupons. Okay, so if you're still banging your heads together and wondering, who might have funded the biggest attack on US soil since, I don't know, Pearl Harbor? I'll give you a clue. Pretty big clue, to be honest. They don't actually come much bigger than that, really. But that's not all. Because not only has Saudi Arabia been linked to funding such lovable organisations as, I don't know, Al-Qaeda, or the younger brother Jabhat al-Nusra, or even the Pakistani terrorist organisation Lashkar al-Taiba, or even ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIL, or Daesh, or whatever the Western media fancies calling them this week. You know the ones, like to chuck gays from tall buildings, burn Jordanian pilots in cages, or fire RPGs at defenceless men tied to stakes on YouTube. And of course, when you're already doing such a stellar job as it is financing terrorism, why stop at ISIS? Why not Arat al-Sham, or Boko Haram, or the Taliban, remember them? You know, formerly the Mujahideen? Yep. All terrorist organisations. Largely Sunni, all Islamist, arguably Wahhabi, all with connections to Saudi Arabia, and all largely funded by Saudi Arabia. You can Google anything I say, you can cross-reference anything I say. But why? What the hell is Saudi Arabia's deal anyway? Why do they have this rank compulsion to terrorise the West? Well, to find that out, we need to take a deeper look at Wahhabism. But just before I step on that hornet's nest, just a brief disclaimer. Just a quick message to any of the right-wing community that might happen to stumble across this video on YouTube and then insensitively bend this description of Wahhabism, which is a very specific right-wing, extremist, 7th century socio-political version of Islam, which is actually very, very, very small, and then bend it as if it's some kind of description of Islam in general. Please kindly discontinue watching my video. Do not use any of my material. I do not support you, what you stand for, or what you almost definitely smell like. Please hang yourself. Okay. Now we've got the blunt, insufferable formalities out of the way, we can start talking about the founder of Wahhabism, this bloke, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, who I'm pretty sure we can all agree looks just about as stoned as anyone has ever looked in the history of anything ever. Which is quite ironic, really, because no doubt being stoned is something this man probably would have hated, purely because he seems to have hated everything else. He's probably just a little bit tired. Although a Wahhabi interpretation of Islam didn't actually take root in Saudi Arabia until the early part of the 20th century, with the assistance of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, you'll find the ideology actually finds its original roots with this man, Ibn Taymiyyah, the 14th century preacher who died in 1328. A man whose interpretation of the faith is widely and broadly disputed and refuted by Islamic scholars, followers, and preachers the world over. In fact, what needs to be understood about Wahhabism in general is the magnitude in which it differs from the general interpretation of the faith, By its very nature, Islam is peaceful. Wahhabism is, well, this. Don't even worry though, because I can totally fix this. Done. Now that building from the previous shot was destroyed by ISIS, who I fully concede are not Saudi Arabia. But they are very much made up of people from Saudi Arabia, as they are funded by Saudi Arabia. But most importantly in this context, they are quintessentially Wahhabi. Now, one of the doctrinal components that distances Wahhabism from other sects of Islam is its general animosity towards idol worship. This makes silly things like statues, or sculptures, or crucifixes, or places of worship in general a big no-go for Wahhabism, which manifests as what we saw ISIS do in the ancient Assyrian city of Palmyra, or the Iraqi city of Nimrud. If it's not already obvious, I love history. I always have. What you can see going on in the background now offends me personally and genuinely upsets me.
More than 3,000 years of history obliterated in seconds. This video was released by ISIS. CNN cannot independently verify its authenticity, but it purports to show the radicals destroying Nimrud, one of the most important archaeological sites in Iraq. ISIS fighters used power tools to break down ancient statues, frescoes, and walls. These are remnants of the ancient Assyrian civilization. Nimrud used to be its capital.
Alright, that's enough of that. I can't stand it anymore. Let's get back to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab! There he is. Now, in contrast to the photograph I showed you earlier, where, let's face it, he looked very high, this one he seems super wired. Now, we can either conclude that he just doesn't take a very good photograph, or there's something Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab isn't telling us about his social life. Now, if you're under the impression that Islam bears some kind of religious animosity towards Christianity or Judaism, you're simply just wrong. It doesn't. Islam actually perceives followers of Christianity and Judaism as merely children of the book. They genuinely believe that the religions are actually intertwined. They share a lot of the same beliefs, prayer rituals, holy sites, even prophets. For goodness sake, the Quran mentions Moses and Jesus more often than it does Muhammad. Even things as quintessentially Islamic as wearing a headscarf were stolen from ancient Christian civilizations like Byzantium. They're Christian traditions, they're nothing to do with Islam. But this cheerful, let's face it, potential drug addict did not share this feeling of unity with other faiths. In fact, perceived any faith other than Islam as a threat to his own faith. Therefore, Wahhabism is extremely intolerant of other faiths. Let's play Where's Wahhabi?
P-A-P. I have a pen, I have an apple, apple pen. I have a pen, I have pineapple, pineapple pen, apple pen, pineapple pen, pineapple, apple pen.
Sorry about that, I couldn't help myself. Now, when you've got an idea for a new sect of Islam which is almost entirely predicated on hate, it's a little bit difficult for it to take hold properly. So Wahhabism in the early part of the 20th century needed some kind of political support in order for it to take root in Saudi Arabia. Now, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab found this support with Al Saud, who you might remember from the previous episode. Now, considering Muhammad Al Saud eventually became king of what became Saudi Arabia through conquest, this gave Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab all of the political support he needed in order to propel Wahhabism to become the state religion that it is now in Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, there was no real reason at the time why Wahhabism really needed to extend any further than Saudi Arabia. It was, by all accounts, a localized phenomenon. There was no reason for it to stretch into the Saudi periphery. But of course they discovered oil, didn't they? Now, what needs to be appreciated is the fact that this is all going on during the height of the British Empire. Now, before oil was discovered, Arabia had always managed to dodge territorial ambitions of the colonial powers because, ironically, it wasn't considered valuable enough. But in 1938, this was going on.
Und für dieses Volk und dieses Volk wollen wir ringen und wollen wir kämpfen und niemals erlahmen und niemals ermüden und niemals verzagen und niemals...
So, I don't think it's too outlandish to suggest that the British were, well, busy, which gave Wahhabism and Saudi Arabia the breathing space it needed in order to expand. Oil had transformed Saudi Arabia basically overnight from a fundamentalist, insignificant, destitute desert country into an unbelievably wealthy, capable fundamentalist state. Every liberal democracy in the world had to come to Saudi Arabia cap in hand like the little boy Oliver asking, "Please sir, may I have some more?" And you couldn't even invade the place because all they would do is destroy the oil wells, rendering the global economy useless. Saudi Arabia had become untouchable.
Oil is power, and Saudi Arabia has it. Indeed, it's hard to find anything that Saudi Arabia hasn't got, except the population to enjoy it. This is the refinery at Ras Tanura, one of the biggest in the world. It's run by the Arabian-American oil company, Aramco, once the property of American oil companies, soon to become the exclusive property of the Saudis. But because they have so small a population, they won't have the skilled labor to run it for some years yet. Like so much in the new booming Saudi economy, the oil business will rely on foreign labor, skilled and unskilled, for some time to come. But what matters is the money. And once the takeover is complete, that'll all go to the Saudis. And the sums are mind-boggling. Crude oil from these tanks and finished products from the refinery make Saudi Arabia the world's third largest producer, but by far the largest exporter. 1 million tons a day pass through these pipes and out to the waiting tankers, nearly 4 times as much as Britain's entire daily oil consumption. All this earns the Saudis £36 million a day, 4 times what it was only 14 months ago. Half this oil goes to Europe. Britain gets 20% of her oil from Saudi Arabia, and 1/3 goes to Japan. An increasing amount, at present about 5%, goes to the United States, reflecting America's increased reliance on oil imports from the Middle East. There seems little likelihood of Saudi oil drying up. Much of the country seems to be almost floating on oil. Here in the Abgeig and Gawar fields, they know the oil's there at a certain depth. All they've got to do is drill down, put in a pipe or a tap, and the stuff will pour out whenever they want it. Saudi oil reserves are 1/4 of the entire world's, and the figure is constantly going up as new fields are discovered. Even so, the Saudis constantly talk of limiting production to avoid the oil running out one day. They did it with dramatic effect during the October War last year. The prime aim of British and Western diplomacy now is to try and persuade the oil producers to use their new power wisely and not to let other countries go to ruin. They argue that the oil producers like Saudi Arabia should be careful with their new power because in this interdependent world we all sink or swim together. Now, some Arabs retort that this argument is a bit hard to maintain in the light of the history of Western exploitation of this part of the world, but the hope is that other Arabs, like King Faisal, will accept it. Peter Snow, News at 10, Saudi Arabia.